I
anyway.
just got a query last
And
night.
the town hall.
Blue? You don't have any of them?
What?
Are we,
Or here's your hand.
why are you guys saying?
Shower, toilet, all that stuff. And they're permanent.
Yeah.
They, have to put in a holding tank. Read 500 gallons. Yeah,
There
that's
sure
not
is.
good.
You want to do
Otherwise,
this too?
they have to. I'm gonna put a trailer and go to their pump station.
Stayed up in
Blackberry.
There's no chair here, Phil.
Yeah.
Summer.
Come grab one.
And,
I can move
they
my
got some,
stuff too.
they got some sites with that full.
I'm going sandwich,
Sure.
turkey or ham?
Turkey.
If it is.
Oh, yeah. Miss says you got three. Well, yeah.
Special class for the DOT.
Hopeful. Grass is like this. What do you call that, a remote?
Alright, it's 11:31, I call this meeting to order. Did everyone have a chance to look at the minutes from the last meeting? Any additions or corrections? I entertain a motion to approve. So moved.
Second.
Motion has been made and seconded to approve the minutes from the last meeting. Any further discussion? All in favor? Aye. So, we're looking at, discussion and possible motion of, goals and objectives. I'm not sure that we know any goals and objectives at this point. I mean, actually, I have something that I'd like to input, but, I guess maybe I might wanna hear if there's any update from Venture or Samuels.
Sure. So, kind of give you an update of where we currently are in the process. We have, taken the sheriff and several of the staff to other campuses or other jails, that are in the state of Wisconsin to get some ideas of elements of the design that they would like to have in the design that makes some sense from a staff efficiency perspective, safety and security perspective, what it will look like in regards to, a jail on a campus, to be able to tie it to the courthouse, those sorts of things. So those visits took place, got the feedback back from them. And now Venture is currently in the process of working on some preliminary layouts and designs for the jail here on this campus, and how do we tie to the court. So kind of the driving efforts behind these first phases is to get a schematic design or a floor plan established and put together that budget for the preliminary design to get this communication plan off the ground. Meaning that we can then get the information to you, this committee, and then obviously the board, and then get it up to the community and the county in regards to what the county's considering in regards to the deal. So, Corey, if you want to add on to that?
So our process started, we do a programming, go through spaces for the jail, sport spaces. We looked at the number of cells that would be required, what type of cells those would be. So we do basically a spreadsheet, programming on spaces, what we think we need, and then we take that and convert it into a preliminary schematic plan. So spatially, you can start to take a look at how many of those spaces. We've done that, we toured, as Kurt said, we've come back, we had a preliminary schematic plan, looked at that. In our last meeting, we looked at some areas that we could cut and reuse. And we don't need, we looked at receiving cells and how many those would be, we cut off of those, reduce the size of the footprint of the building, but keeping those spatially, those spaces, looking at those, and the adjacencies between jail support and the housing lot. Making sure we have that connection, how we're connected to the courts, and keeping that secure. That's where we're at right now.
And you're basing all this on, this, what you're proposing to go across the street? Is that, okay, and that's the only thing that we are gonna be presented with, that one option?
So that's what we were looking at, what we've done to this point is so we looked at those spaces. And if the location doesn't work out, taking those spaces, we know what we need and how we're gonna address that into other areas.
Okay, so roughly then, how many square foot is what you're proposing?
Right now, the first floor is about 38,000 square feet currently, and we're looking to reduce that as much.
Okay, so, and that's just a single floor?
Single floor, and then the housing is 2 stories. I don't have the number of exactly what the housing, because that was one of our discussions of, mainly today of what that size is gonna be.
The reason why I ask is because, actually I went out this morning, Terry and I did, and we did some rough measurements of the areas available around this building. The existing building, courthouse here, and we figured roughly, about maybe 20,000 square foot underground that might, could be utilized, in that.
If you stay on this block, is what you're saying?
Yes,
Yeah.
yes. And possibly then, instead of a single story, look at, 2 stories structure for that.
So the jail support currently is a single story, and all those functions should be on the same level, and that includes the vehicle sally port, pre-booking, booking areas, receiving areas, all those functions that operate from there into housing. That's typically the jail single story, even multi-story roads. But potentially if one site doesn't work out, to look at, the other parking lot, if that's a potential option. The housing would essentially go up and it would be 3 stories instead of single 1 or 2 stories.
So I think what I would recommend, because we've done an evaluation of the program to be able to meet the DOC requirements for it, so I guess I would like to kind of set the premise, we back up to your goals and objectives from a board level. One of the things that I like to ask of a board is the design of this building, what's the expectation in regards to how long is it gonna perform? And what I mean by that is that you're going to do a borrowing to build a jail, right? That borrowing is gonna take you 20 years to pay it off. There is an expectation of the county board and its taxpayers in regards to how long should that building be able to perform for the county beyond the 20 years. So is the expectations or goals of expectations to be, we want this building to function for 30+ years. We want the goal or expectation to be the most staff efficient design that we can incorporate onto this campus. We want a goal and a focus or a component to be that it is secure, safe and secure for not only the staff, but also the inhabitants, meaning the inmates, as well as all of the public that's out there. Those are the type of goals that I would hear from you guys. And then if the goal would be that we would like to fit it on the property that we own, what does that look like? So we could give you a pretty fair representation of what does the programming space look like on your existing footprint. And right now, it won't fit in your parking lot, and then provide the connection to the courts the way that it would be efficient. It would check a box under one, that if we stacked it, all of a sudden we fit it into this small little component, but it doesn't meet staff efficiency. It doesn't meet the connection and safety and security that's there, and it also causes other issues in regards to parking and entrances that are already established on the campus. So that would be a checklist that we could easily present to this committee and to the board to say, this is why our recommendation would be that the building needs to be attached somewhere on the south side of this campus, and how do we do that in the most efficient way possible? And I think the square footage is driven by that, because what you're going to get, or the feedback that you're gonna get, is how big does that building need to be? This building is being driven by meeting code requirements that are driven by the DOC, as well as the IBC, or that International Building Code. It's not that there's these expansive areas that are in there that are unused or unused. The arbitrary area that you get in a discussion is bed count, right? We had that meeting with you guys, that discussion about the first time, is how big is the bed count? Corey talked about that, we pulled this thing down, and reduced it down to 58 cells, right? The 58 cells are sized so that we can then double bunk some of them to be able to comply with what the DOC will allow, because there's a limitation on how much we can do that. But once you get to that 58 cells, there are day room requirements in regards to square footages. There are programming requirements that have to be done, and that's really what we're working on right now, to be able to get that to fit on this campus. If the reservation is, what does it look like in regards to acceptance from the city about taking over a street? I'm sure most of you are aware, we are on the city council's meeting on Monday to talk about the option of looking at minor, and what does that look like to build in that location. We've done this at other municipalities. There's a process that you have to work through. We'll work with the city to talk to them about what works for them, what would they like to see, start that dialogue, and it would be something that's gonna take some time to go find out, what does that option look like? Is it a viable option, and what does it look like for both sides, the city and the county?
Would we be better off going to a standalone building somewhere else? Would be cheaper?
Well,
That throws in, some of the goals, obviously, for the project was, you want that secure connection to the courts. So,
Well, then we could move the courthouse, move the courts and everything.
yeah, if you're gonna build a justice center and not just a jail, it's gonna be more expensive, right? So, the short answer to your question is, to be able to get the same performance in regards to a justice center being connected without having to deal with transport somewhere else, more expensive. The next question could be, could we phase that? Could we build a jail somewhere, and then down the road, bring the courts out there? Counties have considered that, counties talk about that, it is an option that could be explored. I can tell you right now that the new jail that would be built out there is going to look, in regards, very similar to this square footage, right? So the program that's there, we're gonna meet the same requirements that are in there. It's a challenge of where do you find the greenfield site to be able to do that? And then what is the game plan of when do you take courts out there? Because here's what you gotta understand, is that you're gonna borrow, and you're gonna impact paying for it for 20 years. So is the county ready to say, we're gonna move them all out there before 20 years, or are we gonna wait 20 years when we've got that paid off before we do another borrowing? You see the challenge that you have there? So that's the element that's tied into it. Evaluating your county, I think the most cost-effective solution right now is to find a way to get the building constructed on this campus and connected to your courts. With a strategy, and here's the other thing that looking at your campus, you guys have to have a strategy that how are you gonna back out of some of these buildings as they continue to age? So that you're not just connecting to this building and expect that every part of this building is gonna last another 100 years. Because you're gonna have a strategy of how do you work out of that, and what we're looking at gives you that flexibility, gives you some of those opportunities, so that you do have a long-range plan.
There's no room basically for expansion, as far as I'm concerned, by going across the street. What if in 20 years, I ain't gonna worry about it, but what if in 20 years they wanna expand somewhere, where would they go?
So, that's part of what, we don't have that finalized yet, but we're gonna look at a long-range plan to say, if this courthouse or the sheriff's office or other government services needs to be added onto that campus, do you look at, cause you basically own half that city block down there, right? There are strategies that other counties have looked at, is that the game plan would be, is if property becomes available, you would start to build on the balance of that, and then as you take this building down, you start to replace building with parking lot. so that you're starting to utilize the space that you have on those two city blocks to be able to get your government services taken care of. So, there are ways to accomplish it, right? It's a matter of how do you get to that point, and what does that long range plan look like? So,
What about, as far as building on the east side, you said it's about 20,000 square feet there, does that include building that's already there, or is that just a vacancy spot?
Yeah, they reference a 20,000 square feet, I don't know exactly what the number
I
is,
don't know what the
but,
area they're
but the parking lot itself, I think is probably what they're looking at, just what we're at.
Well, there was like, some additional square footage.
On the south side.
On this side, up to where the entries are for the garage. Yeah, and then the parking lots there, we didn't actually include that narrow strip, on that side.
On the north side.
Yeah.
Did you consider the removal of the maintenance building and all that stuff, if it had to be?
I did not, no.
See, that's what my question coming from is, we're gonna remodel, there's no reason why we can't tear down that existing maintenance building to provide some needed room for expansion of the jail, and take that whole parking lot and use that along with it. You know, that is directly alongside the courtroom, there's offices upstairs
So,
for the courtroom, but that could be a way of connecting the whole, all the facility to the existing courtroom.
so we did explore that option, and, I want you to think through that process, right? So, where that building currently sits, that is the newest portion of your campus, that we were proposing that we're taking the newest part of your building down, right? So we gotta consider, hear me out, we gotta consider the optics of that. And then, while we're taking that down, the first step would be, we've gotta take the building down to build the jail there. Where are we now putting all the people that are currently using that space? If we have to have space to put them, and you could lease space, all those things, it's all dollars that add up. Now we're paying to demo a building that functions the way it currently does, right? When our main goal was to get to a jail. So, the strategy is, let's build what our needs. Let's build, don't overbuild, but build our needs, and let's focus on the jail with minimal connection and minimal impact. And what the connections would be is, how do we get from that housing unit to the existing courts, and also deal with a secure entry. So we're also working on getting you a secure entry point on the east side of your campus with some interior renovation. Now you're shaking your head, is there an opposition to that?
I build houses, and this false sense of security, so many people put in these mansions, is ridiculous, so. I don't know how you can guarantee it unless you put 3/4 inch bulletproof glass in every outside window,
Okay.
and
So
all we're doing is gonna aggravate the people to.
yeah, so your concern is not what we're
Is it going
proposing,
to
it's
work?
just security in general.
Yeah.
And I can tell you right now that the security topic at every county that we deal with becomes a very interesting conversation.
Oh, I'm sure.
As to what is secure, right? So, one point that's screened, and then how do staff get in, all that becomes a discussion. So I understand, when you're shaking your head, I wanted to find out, did you think a different location? Cause that leads itself to, that's your public entry on that east side. We keep the jail and the components kind of back of house, right? So that we can incorporate it into the campus that you currently have here, keep that flow.
I saw that rolling gate they put in over there by the clerk's office, and that's totally ridiculous. It's short, most ceilings, you can go up over the top because there's no barrier where the wall is.
Sure.
It's just all sense of security, and it's a lot of money.
Yeah, security is a topic in itself.
I mean, there's a bank, I know you can break into the vault, because you can go through the ceiling, all they have is sheetrock in the ceiling of it, so.
Oh, you've got a game plan here.
He's looking at retirement, right?
Yeah, I'm looking for my retirement plan.
There you go.
No, you bring up a good point, that security is another, completely,
Yeah.
it's a topic in itself, yeah. So, back to your goals and initiatives, it would be nice from the committee and the board level, because what I have typically heard is that most counties, if they're gonna borrow at a 20-year borrowing, the building has to last a minimum of 30 years. Why that may be, you go, why do you wanna know that? It's gonna drive the size of the building so that we can identify what does it look like, right? It's also gonna drive the overall construction of the building from an efficiency perspective of staff, but also building components that are tied back into those things, right? So that's typically what we hear, the location, and I think the hurdle that I think the location would be is closing down a street, right, in general. It's typically not a real popular topic, but I can tell you that doing it multiple times, it's something that can be accomplished if approached with a collective attitude, right? How do we serve this campus and how do we serve the entire city and the community that's here? And I would like to at least get through some preliminary meetings with the city and see how that goes, and then come back to you, the ad hoc, and say, here's what we've heard from them, here's what they would like to see, here's some of their concerns. And then after we get that feedback, come up with a game plan that could make sense for both sides. So what I have done with other municipalities is that we make a proposal to the city that understand what they have for infrastructure in the street, and then figure out the infrastructure needs to be utilities that need to support your campus. And then look at the cost of those utility relocation and construction is burdened by the project, meaning the county would pay for it. It would be designed to meet the parameters and the specifications that the city utilizes for all of their utilities. We would have them have an on-site inspector while the contractors are putting it in, so that they are essentially approving the installation. And upon the completion of those utilities, then the ownership of that is handed off to the city for them maintaining it for the life of the utility. And there's a few things that happen there. The city will see an upgrade in some of their existing utilities that may have seen end of life. They'll get some new streets out of the paving that needs to be done there. And we also have to deal with the service to this campus as well. So it's a win-win a lot of times. As long as, it always comes down to the dollar, or who's paying for something, right? We, as the county, are proposing the need for these utilities, so we're gonna pay for them, right? Let's figure out what we do to be able to accomplish that serves not only this project, but the balance of the community. And I think collectively, if we can get everybody on the same page about there's a need here, let's do it the most cost-effective way, it'll be successful. So,
Wasn't it also discussed, to close down, what, 4th Street, between Lindo and, between Lake and Minor, rather?
I actually think all of the streets were on the table for us.
Well,
We looked at where can we put this that makes the most sense? Take the name of the street off of the list, where does it make the most sense? And I can tell you that we have parked, or proposing to park, that housing unit as tight as we can get it to this existing building for 2 reasons. To shorten the distance that the correctional officers have to take an inmate from housing to courts. And we're actually reutilizing some of that jail floor. So we're, from a cost-effective manner, there is secure corridors down there that we're gonna reutilize to create some court holding on that 2nd floor. And then we can then bring them into court, utilizing some of your secure elements already. So there's dollars and cents in that, in the deciding factors that are driving that. And that one makes the most sense in regards to where it could go.
You closing down Minor Avenue?
Yes. Now, I wanna tell you, I think that if we can come up with some creative ways of what do we do with that street, we're working on some of them, that we would bring before you, the board, and before the city. I think we can make this a win-win for what it does to the community, you know, and how does Venture look at the design, so it doesn't look like, I think when people think of a jail, we're parking the jail downtown and there's gonna be this ugly building with a razor wire around it. That's not the case. We can make this building fit into this community, we can make it a part of Main Street. There's ways that we can get that accomplished, so.
Just to let you know, I had somebody works in an office job for whatever Century Cell is now, Bright Light or whatever.
Right.
And he wondered how come he'd never been contacted, because he's sort of in charge of all this wire out in there. And I said, I don't know, hopefully they know it's there, there's a lot of
Yeah,
besides the city utilities.
Yeah, right now, we're just stepping into, the first hurdle will be with the city, right, let's get through that one first, and then as we get into the next phase of design, obviously, all those utilities will be pulled in, absolutely.
I was just curious.
Yep,
There was a, what was it? There was a negative response to saying having a skyway or a tunnel.
sure,
A tunnel obviously would involve moving all kinds of utilities anyway.
Yeah.
Which I understand, but a skyway wouldn't. Well, what's the drawback to having a skyway?
so Skyway's a couple of things, I've been a part of projects that were skywalks that weren't correctional facilities. Skywalks in general are an expensive piece of building, right? And to serve one purpose. Your skywalk would essentially be to get an inmate from one building to the other. That skywalk that would be built, you would have to have a corridor connection there that is secure. It could not be a common public corridor that's there. And the real estate that you would have associated with that in regards to the structural and mechanical elements that were there would be cost prohibitive. Is the tunnel component that you talked about, the tunnel element, all those utilities have to be rerouted anyways, because you couldn't go through the tunnel. The skywalk is more money than the tunnel element, and it starts to become a safety and security element. And what I would explain, how I would explain it to you is, if there was a staged breakout, or you're gonna free someone, somebody pulls up underneath that skywalk with explosives in a vehicle, and I know we can say that's not gonna happen in Lady Smith, Wisconsin, but we gotta think about all of those elements, right? You wanna have a building so that inmate movement and where that location is not something that is open for public to be able to understand where that's happening. Security elements have to be tied into that. Skywalks have always been something that have been frowned upon, even covered parking elements when you're dealing with secure facility. How do you get what vehicles and how are you screening them to get into there? All of that has to be considered when you're dealing with secure facility. So. And you're extending the distance, right? So what are we accomplishing by saying skywalk? If it's just to keep the street open, and that will be a discussion that we would have with the city. I'm sure the city will have the same question. Why can't we just put a skywalk on it, right? It makes the most sense for the campus to be able to put that housing unit as close to the building as possible.
So, you're working off the premise of Pleasant Street right now, and adding on to this building from the south, existing south wall,
Correct.
and expanding south.
Staying on county-owned property that's south of Minor.
How far into that parking lot would you go? Any idea?
Quite a ways. Yeah, we're quite a ways. We're not all the way to Worden, but, by the time we're gonna have housing, and then we're working on, kind of the jail support, which would be, obviously the main jail entry, booking, pre-booking, the entire intake process, right? And then you have to have your Sally port, so, we're a ways down the block, but we're not all the way to Worden.
The vehicular access to
Yeah.
the support would be off of Ward for both Sally Port and for loading dock for any kind of deliveries for the kitchen.
Are you considering this building to be taken out? This, sport shop?
Yes.
Upstairs?
Yeah.
So that's gotta come out.
Yep.
What about that building that's got that law office across the street next to it, right corner?
Nope, that would stay. So we would be utilizing the entire county-owned property, but nothing beyond the extent of the county-owned property at this point. The street, I would say. And again, we're in a very early stage, so we're gonna continue to move things around. We had some discussion again today, that's gonna change the layout. We're working under those parameters to stay on that county-owned property, and, with the premise that we're gonna address the city about utilizing the security as well.
You haven't worked with the city at all?
We have had a preliminary meeting, the sheriff and I did. We've actually shared with them some of our preliminary thoughts of what utilities would look like. And that prompted the meeting to be in front of the city council here on the 14th. So they have an idea of what we're looking to do, from kind of a big picture down to what utility rerouting would look like. But this is the first time this project, I haven't worked with them on another project, but that was your question.
Our civil engineer did coordinate with the city engineer regarding a lot of the utilities, so there has been contact in that matter as well.
You haven't dealt with a lot of the city people then, and that should prove interesting.
Well, I can tell you that we've done this in multiple locations, and I think if we can all get focused on the same goal and approach it, maybe I'm an optimist. I think that it's something that can be accomplished.
I still got an issue with this, that we don't have an option. It's, that you have one, it's, you know, it's a one-trick pony, and we're looking at $28 million. I believe that we deserve an option.
So when you say an option, I guess, are you wanting to see a floor plan that shows the inefficiency of staffing, shows the inefficiency of connection? To what level do you want the option? Because we can definitely give you a diagrammatic element to show the space that isn't there and how it would fit. I have no problem showing that to you, but to be able to continue to provide a floor plan at a great level of detail for each one of them, when we get to a point where we identify that one doesn't make sense, I think is counterproductive. I wanna show you why we wouldn't recommend one. I have no problem giving that to you from a diagrammatic perspective, but to say that we would take two designs in parallel to one another and have you choose them, like bid two of them out, that's just not cost effective to be able to go through that process. So at what level would you like to see the option?
I'd like to see you go into this with a positive attitude and try to make this work.
I do think I have a positive attitude. I guess, tell me what you mean from make it fit on the east, is that what you're saying? In regards to, there's no other option, make it fit on the east because I don't like the south.
I'm sorry, say that again.
With the attitude of we need to fit it on the east because we don't like the south option, is that the premise
Yes,
of?
I would like to have an option. I'd like to know.
We did do some studies going from programming into that schematic design phase where we began to progress a little bit further on the south. Looking at that east property now, there were a number of negatives that came up through that process. The large part of that was we would be taking up the majority of that parking lot that would be there.
Yeah, I get that.
And then the consideration of and that is a very accessible parking lot at grade. So now the majority of people who would be accessing county services would be crossing the street either from the lot at the west of the sheriff's office or to the south. So that was one consideration that drove us going more towards the south. The other part is by putting that block building on the east side of the building, we now lose the one point that we did here that was of interest, which is that single point of entry. So the main entry point right now into the county services buildings is from the east side from that parking lot. That entry would now have to move either to the north side of the building complex or to the south side of the building complex. The south side was not really that attractive as there were steps. We didn't have an accessible path up to that entry. The north side, while it was accessible, is now further detached from any kind of parking. There's very limited handicap accessible parking to that. The other part, as Kurt had mentioned, was that now the connection, the secure connection to get into the courts created a lot more disruption in the existing facility to get that in there. Trying to manage a secure corridor with a public corridor and where the judge's chambers were. So we have given that a lot of consideration, and a lot of items that we were finding through that process drove us in a path down that south side. Now, we certainly can continue down that path and give it a bit more of an exhaustive look. We're more than happy to do that.
I think what we need to do is put a diagram together so that we can explain to them
Yeah.
why we went to the south. I don't wanna.
I don't
dismiss-
see why, I don't know, one of your, negatives on it was parking and people accessing, crossing the street. So we went to see Trempealeau, and I didn't notice really where there was people that parked had to cross the street there with the new facility. So I'm not sure,
Okay.
you know, why that would come into play. A lot of people park either in that lot or in that one over there, and they both have to
I
cross
want
the
you to
street to get
understand,
to the building.
Trempealeau is actually one that combined two city streets. We're not talking one city street, so if you're doing a comparison in regards to the campuses that are there, we're proposing to do the exact same thing we did in Trempealeau here, to combine two of them to be able to give you a spatial understanding of what are we proposing here. I think here's the thing that is gonna probably trip up a fair amount of, community members or board members. They're gonna see a jail that is larger than what is here currently, because your right now is not compliant from a code perspective. And what I mean by that is when we get into the cell sizes, the day room sizes, the circulation that's required, and then we get to a pod design, because we're running under the premise that we do not want to be able to have this thing so heavily needed from staff, we need to get to a 3-post design. That's why when you see the pod design, and if you walk Trempealeau, you're able to experience that, it's a circular element of housing that has one post perspective. What you guys saw from a diagrammatic element that Walt had in their study was a linear jail. Linear jails are done,
Yeah.
you don't utilize them. So,
Which, I like the design of that part of it. What is the square footage of that, of a pod you're proposing for us?
That I don't have the exact numbers right now.
so the pod is part of the 38,000 square feet. So
But you don't know, you can't narrow it down for us.
It's probably half this 38, so you're looking at.
About 20,000 square foot.
So, I guess I want to stress that we are not going to over-design the square footage, just to over-design the square footage. We're doing this to be able to minimize cost impact, but to be able to give you a deliverable on a building that will serve you well into the future. And if we needed to go through room by room so that you understood the need for each one of them and the square footage that drives it, it can be an exercise that we can do to bring everybody's mind at ease that there's not just this spacious area that we're just, putting it in to put it in. But there's obviously a requirement there that we need to comply with.
Well, at least that would give us something to compare. You're obviously gonna go with that, you seem to be hard set on that.
I'm not.
But I still wanna see something else.
We will give you the documentation that explains why we would recommend the south.
I don't want documented, I wanna see drawings. I wanna see you try to utilize that space to do this project. That's what I wanna see.
We will give you something.
Yeah.
We'll provide that.
What happens, if you close the street down, I don't care if that one or this one or both? Is that gonna have to become an agreement with the city to do that?
Yes.
Because there's, purchase components involved.
Yes. It would be a legal agreement. Yep. Whenever I've worked with it, your court counsel will be involved with the city's legal
That'd
counsel.
have to occur first, wouldn't it, for it to see, hey,
Well, you can run under the agreement that you both are going to come to the agreement, and we work through that final agreement process while we're doing the design phase. But you're right, before we're gonna break ground, that agreement needs to be finalized.
Does anyone else have something to
Speak,
add?
yeah. One is, did Eau Claire County ever staff their new jail down there yet? They didn't, they built it, but didn't staff it at the beginning.
Yeah, that staff is running.
Is running now? Okay. How many, I don't know, 58 just sounds high to me with the potential to double bunk and stuff. The courts have gotta start figuring out pretty quick, if jail doesn't work. And we're spending tens of thousands of dollars for each inmate that's in a state prison and we're not getting anything, they're coming back out and it's cyclical. We have to figure out some way to break that cycle, and there are certain ones out there that are doing it, but it's very, very, very limited. We're just not doing a good job with our prisoners, to be honest, in my opinion. And I've been on this committee for 3 sheriffs now, you know, and the figure's always been around 30, 40, you know, as far as people upstairs. And then the other thing is, okay, we've got this for 30 years out, me as a builder, codes change all the time. How many things are we gonna have to change for this in 30 years? You know, hopefully we'll learn from some of our mistakes from this one and build a better setup than we have here, but, you know, these are the questions that just sort of bother me, it's like, I've seen codes change which have absolutely no sense at all.
Yeah, let's address the code, element first, is, again, none of us can forecast what's gonna happen in 30 years, right?
Yeah.
But the way that we are designing these, and with the pod design, what really drove a lot of the changes throughout the state of Wisconsin, and it's gonna impact a lot of areas, was the classification element that came in 2014, right? And we are, from a classification perspective, I'm gonna tell you right now, the classification is driving this design more than bed count. What I mean by that is, the jail staff have to have the availability to properly classify your inmates, meaning that if you have 30 and you only have 3 or 4 classifications, you are compromised in regards to how you can manage your population, to the point that you may even have to house out a county even though you have a bed or a bunk there, because you're not gonna properly classify. So we are driving with classification first and bed count second, but we have to have the bed count projected enough so that in 30 years, you're not at the table again saying, well, no beds, right? So there's a strategy in there where there's a fine balance, right? So when we do the size of a cell, we size the cell so that the allowable amount could be double bunk, and it's only an increase of a few square feet versus an entirely new cell, and day room size is driven by the same way. So that's where when you look at how are we building growth into the building, we are, without just saying, you know, in 30 years, we're gonna add another pod, because now you gotta double the staff. This gives you the
I agree with that.
But that's a challenge, is that boards they're given the responsibility to make a decision that's generational. You guys are making a generational decision here, and I understand it's not something you take lightly, it shouldn't be, right? So you should be challenging, but understand that we're bringing information and experiences that we've used in many counties that, you know, to answer your question, we've learned from some of the mistakes that have happened in the past, so.
And the other thing, we can't do anything until you meet with the city before we can even take a step.
Correct, yeah.
The other thing is too, is like, so in 2023, your jail is designed and built to today's current code for DOC 350. 8 years from now, you guys, you know, let's say you guys occupied that space for 5 years, code changes. Your jail will be held constructually for the detention purposes. The jails built from 2023 to this period, they fall into this range. And that's what your jail will be compared to, not the newer standards as far as construction. Does that make sense? Cause we have,
That's what's going on right now.
you know, cause we have older jails, like in this region, that when I.
Grandfather.
Right, so I go through, and they might have something that today's building code, as far as correction, DOC 350, it wouldn't allow, but because it was built here, they're compliant with that. So, then I hope that kind of clears that up a little bit, just to.
Yeah, I understand that part, it's just that.
So that
State
so
laws
that point
changing
is
the game.
sort of moot. Even if it does, if the codes, if we do become non-compliant, it's there. And, we won't, I mean, it's gonna be just like what we have now, it'll be considered essentially grandfathered, we're not gonna be forced by anyone to actually.
But when we talk about the building codes, like the materials, the detention, the windows, the doors, the frames, all that stuff is there, you guys will be signed up on. The big issue to Kurt's point was when 2014 came in, classification was the game changer. That had nothing to do with construction wise, as far as the type of door you have. It's essentially how you house.
And
that's
that
the
had to
issue.
be compliant,
Yes.
regardless of
Yeah,
how you're
in
doing.
2014.
So classification, male, female,
know where this is going.
Yep, and you're right.
You know,
have-
yeah, I don't even wanna go there.
Okay, but those are all the things that we have to take into accountability when we put two people together. You know, are they involved in the same crime? Are there any of these special circumstances? Are they, you know, are they related? Do they not get along on the outside? These are all things that come together. Not including the medical, the high risk, the suicide stuff, the things that all have to come into play when we decide to put two people in the same room together.
Whole nother issue.
It is, but that's what's driving the bus here.
Saving us from getting sued.
Well, you're right, Phil. You're right.
Why should we have to make nominations for somebody because they can't decide what sex they are? That's ridiculous.
We could probably argue that all day long.
I'm sure we could, but I mean, yeah, you know, if you're gonna go against the law, then you should accept whatever accommodations the county has to provide for you. That's the way I look at it.
Not the law, no. Not the law.
Whether you're, whatever you identify as. Sure.
Well, they are innocent.
The federal guidelines don't agree with that.
And I think
See, and that's what, and that, you know, the more we've been to that, I mean, the worse this country is gonna get. It's just.
But it's not just that, there's all other circumstances and classifications, it's not just transgender, there's medical, mental health issues, et cetera.
But that's different. I
But
mean,
it
that's-
still plays a different.
But I understand that I can understand, I mean, that, yeah,
Right, don't understand.
but this other crap is like.
Speaking of that, will this have a place for mental holdings or not?
Yeah. It falls under special needs.
Okay. But will that require additional staff?
Nope, we're gonna design this to meet the three goals that we talked about at the beginning.
Same as we have now.
Hope it's better than what they have out at the hospital.
Anything else from anyone? Any announcements?
So Justin from Baird is coming to present on possible bonding options for our jail at the September Finance Committee meeting. So I would invite all of you that aren't already on finance to come to that presentation.
Send us a reminder.
Please.
Okay, you got it.
When is that?
Well, it'll be on the agenda, right?
September, whenever finance normally is. September meeting of finance. So the 21st.
It's a regular finding.
Yep.
And then, Ashley, you could send something out after they have their meeting with the council to let us know what your best guess is to what they agreed on.
Sure, like a recap.
Yeah,
Sure.
just so we have some idea where we're headed.
Yep.
For somebody who doesn't make the courthouse very often, I really don't like to.
Sounds good, we'll keep grinding on it.
Alright, when would you like to meet again?
Is our next one the 30th?
2 months again? That give you time to?
Yeah, we'll do this and then, we'll do this and then do inspection first.
Should we meet with them after our meeting on the 30th? Does that work?
Yeah.
And August 30th, we're gonna be meeting again, so do we wanna do another, like 11 o'clock? August 30th?
On August 30th?
Then we can
Is
give
that-
you, we can
Is
give you
that,
an update
with
of.
anybody else's meeting? So tentatively then, August 30th at 11?
11.
I won't make that, I won't be back in town till probably 2 or 3.
Wait, okay, Terry's gonna be on too. Can you both make it?
Where's that?
Can you make it on the 30th?
Yeah.
Alan, can you?
I believe so.
Okay.
Do you wanna do it the following week,
Let's go with the following week then. I would prefer everybody can be here. September sixth?
Six.
Still August 30th?
Yeah,
Still
September, Wednesday, September sixth,
11 a.m.
11. So that being said, I will entertain a motion to adjourn.
Ooh.
Do we have a second? All in favor? Aye. Meeting adjourned at 12:20.
No, I don't. We did one tree.
If you take out the
Yeah.
garbage,
Yeah.
As long as you have good corners, it works. Yeah.
Where do you put it on?
They might know that. Like, not with the, not with the.
If it's not really true,
Actually, thank you.
This is when I